Parshas Shoftim. This week's Parsha contains many different mitzvos, many different concepts, and among them is what happens when the Jews want to structure their government in a developed way. So it says, the Torah says, this is starting with 17:14, Yud Zayin Yud Daled, Ki savo ha'aretz asher Hashem Elokecha nosin lo v'rishto yashavta bo. When you come to the land that the Lord your God has given you to settle, and you will dwell in it. And you'll say, let's appoint ourselves a king, like all of the nations that are around us. So there's some question about whether that's actually a laudable thing to say, oh, we want to be like all the nations of the world. But be it as it may, the concept of Malchus, the concept of the kingship in Israel is a well-respected one. The Gemara talks about it. Rambam has Hilchos Malachim. The Rambam talks about the laws of the kings. So whatever the motivations, pure, impure, or a combination, there will come a time that a king will be appointed. So the Torah says, so appoint for yourself a king, that the Almighty will choose, and it should be among your brethren. Can't appoint a foreigner. Has to be a member of the Bnei Yisrael, children of Israel. And then it goes on, we won't read it verbatim, but it goes on to impose various restrictions. He can't have an excessive number of horses, and he shouldn't have an excessive amount of money, an excessive number of wives. And then Pasuk Yud Ches, that's 18, says as follows. Here's an affirmative obligation, not just a restriction. And it will be when he ascends to his throne, to the throne of the kingship. And he will write we'll call for now, Mishnei HaTorah has many meanings, but we're going to ascribe the meaning that most commentaries say, at least most that I've seen, which is a copy of the full Sefer Torah. Al Sefer, on, the commentaries say this means on parchment, just like a regular Sefer Torah. Milifnei Cohanim Halavim, from before the Cohanim, the Leviim. That's seems to be surplusage. What does it mean? He's going to write it before the Cohanim Halavim. Let's read the next verse, and then we'll go back to this question. V'yisa imo, and it will be with him. V'karbo kol yemei chayav, and he will read it all the days of his life. Said he'll learn to fear God and to do all of the mitzvos. In other words, and the commentaries say that this is actually a special requirement of a king. Every Jew has an obligation to write his own Sefer Torah. Okay, we fulfill it in different ways. We've mentioned this before. According to some Meforshim, the Rosh and others, we fulfill this by having Sfarim, by having Sifrei Kodesh, holy books that we study from in our homes. Sometimes we participate when there's a Hachnasa Sefer Torah, when there's bringing in a new Sefer Torah to a synagogue, to a Beis Knesset, so we participate in the Ksivas Osios, in the writing of the letters, but whatever it is, there is an obligation, a standard for every Jew to write his own Sefer Torah. This is an additional Sefer Torah that the king is supposed to have, and the Gemara talks about it and says that he's supposed to carry it with him all the time. It's only when he goes to places where you're not supposed to introduce Sefer Torah, such as the bathroom or other unclean places, etc., that he's not supposed to carry with him. Otherwise, he's supposed to carry the Sefer Torah all the time. And that's in addition to the one that he keeps in Beis Knesset in his treasure house. In other words, his other Sefer Torah. So this is a second copy, and this is imposed only on the king. The king has the obligation to write this Sefer Torah. Let's go back to the question that we had before, which is, why does the verse before that, preceding that, which is 18 Yud Ches, say, it writes it on a Sefer, and the Meforshim say not on paper, not on stone, but it's got to be written just like any other Sefer Torah on parchment with ink. Milifnei haKohanim haLeviim, before the Kohanim and the Leviim. What does that add? So the Meforshim explained, this goes back to the Medrash Tanoim and others, that it has to be written from, in other words, the master copy, the master from which the copy is made, must be the one that is in the rishus of the authority and possession of the Kohanim and the Leviim and the Zikanim, the elders, which we commonly understand to be the Sanhedrin, the great court. So the Ralbag points to several chapters later, Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Tes, that's 31:9, where the Torah says, Vayichtov Moshe es haTorah hazos. Moshe wrote this Torah, Vayitna el haKohanim, B'nai Levi, and he gave them to the Kohanim, the children, the sons of Levi, of the tribe of Levi. Hanosim es Aron Bris Hashem, the ones who carry, the Leviim, carry the Aron Bris Hashem. Some say this is talking about the Kohanim in certain limited cases carried the Aron HaKodesh, the Holy Ark as well. The El Kol Ziknei Yisrael. and to all of the elders of Israel. In other words, Moshe wrote a Sefer Torah and deposited it for safekeeping with the Cohanim, Halaviyim, Ziknei Yisrael. Now, it's not the only Sefer Torah he wrote. First of all, there's a Sefer Torah that's in the Aron Bris Hashem, that's in the Aron Kodesh. There also, Chazal say that he wrote a Sefer Torah, one for each tribe, Torah's Moshe. Each tribe had a copy. But this is the master copy, the Ralbag says, this is the master copy from which the king must write his Sefer. And it's done under the auspices and under the supervision of the Beis Din Hagadol, the great court. This is in the Rambam says, Umagian oso mi Sefer Ha'azara al pi Beis Din Hagadol. This Sefer Torah is referred to as the Sefer Ha'azara, that is the master copy that's kept in the Azara, in the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash, of the temple, and Magian oso, which means that it's reviewed and inspected to make sure that it's perfect. We're going to talk about that in a minute, about the perfection that's necessary for every Sefer Torah. This one, the master copy, the master, is the Sefer Torah that's Munach B'Azara, that's in the Azara. So the Chizkuni, the Ralbag, the Vila Gaon, many others say that when it says Milifnei HaKohanim Halaviyim, it means that he has to use that Sefer Torah as the one to make sure that everything he writes is accurate. Now, why? There are various opinions. There's a commentary by Yitzchak Shmuel Reggio, who says that there are aspects of rulership, of rule, that are not expressly spelled out in the Torah. They only apply to the Kohen, and they are in the nature of Torah Sheba'al Peh, of oral transmission of the tradition. And those, the Kohanim and the Beis Din Hagadol, these are the people who are in the position of advising and guiding the king on those matters. In other words, it's not simply what does the Torah say, but it's also what do the guardians of the tradition have to say as the transmitters of the tradition. What insights do they have into policy, into rule, perhaps into matters of diplomacy? So this assures, according to this understanding, an interaction with the people who are the guardians of the tradition. You might also understand that there is a separate notion of, well, according to Rabbi Shamshon Raphael Hirsch, the reason that the king keeps his copy that's supervised by the Kohanim is to show that no one's above the law. Even the king, although what he says goes, even the king is subject to some measure of, let's call it in today's terminology, checks and balances. The king has to make sure that what he's doing is in conformity with the law. Perhaps it's Magino, so that it's supervised, it's supervision, it's a stamp of a seal of approval, the OU or the CRC, on this copy of the Sefer Torah, is to make sure that the king doesn't change it, doesn't manipulate it, the text for his convenience. There are many restrictions on the king over and above restrictions that apply to everyone. And no one likes restrictions. People prefer not to be restricted. And the king prefers not to be restricted. I don't really know that because I've never been one. But one must assume, as the aphorism goes, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Kings like power. They like to do what they want to do, and they frequently feel it's appropriate. And we talk about the divine right of kings. This is the divine right of kings. Nevertheless, he's subject to the letter of the law, and that letter can't change. It must be perfect. It must be perfectly accurate. Now, the halacha is, the law is, that if a Sefer Torah is in any way written, if it deviates in any, let's say, any meaningful way, and we'll talk about what meaningful is, it's invalid and can't be read. We're not now talking about the Sefer Torah of the king, but we're talking about all Sefer Torah. The Torah scroll cannot be read in public to fulfill the obligation of reading the Parshat HaShavua, the portion of the week, if it has a psul, if it has a some kind of error or degradation. What do I mean? We just, this past Shabbos, was having a shul here in Ramat Beit Shemesh, where there was a Sefer Torah where the letter that was supposed to be a ches, which is written like an upside down U, was written like a hey, which means that it had a break at the top. And they had to roll it up, put the gartel, the band, around the outside, and they had to replace it. And people were inconvenienced. And I was actually inspired in a moment because the preservation of the integrity of the Torah is part of the preservation of the integrity of our Masorah, of our tradition. And this goes back thousands of years. And if a letter is minutely imperfect, if two letters just barely touch each other, but they touch each other. It's no longer a kosher Sefer Torah. We are mandated to preserve the integrity of the written word. It could be, this is way beyond my area of expertise, but I can speculate just like anybody else. It could be that the preservation of the integrity of the Torah is actually what preserved Hebrew as the language of the Jews, preserved it without any changes, which is that any Jew all over the world picks up a Chumash, picks up a printed copy of the Torah, and reads the exact same thing for generations. I've heard said that there are, in various manuscripts, there are like up to 6 deviations. Now, I took Shakespeare at college, and I know, for example, in one of the plays, the name Bolingbroke was written in 2 different works, 2 different editions of Shakespeare, 2 different ways, B-R-O-O-K and B-R-O-K-E. And that's just 400 years ago, and that's with a printing press. That's not something that's done by hand. So it's remarkable, and it's a requirement that the transmission of the Masorah, of the tradition, be 100% perfect. And the king's copy had to be 100% perfect, accurate, so that there would be no deviations and that we would preserve the tradition for thousands of years. Have a good shot.